Welcome back to Unsolved Murders South Africa. I'm your host, Andile Siklecha, and today we begin season 2 of the show. For our new listeners, this is the podcast where we take a deep dive into South Africa's most puzzling cold cases and unresolved mysteries, cases that leave families in limbo, communities unsettled, and investigators frustrated. Cases where the evidence is scattered, the questions outnumber the answers, and justice remains painfully out of reach. This season, we'll continue our journey through stories that have haunted headlines and lingered in the hearts of South Africans long after the initial media spotlight faded. Now, for our first case of season 2, we're heading to the slopes of Cape Town's iconic mountains, to a story that, to this day, continues to trouble both South Africans and the global community. This is the case of Nick Frischke, a 22-year-old tourist from Germany who came to Cape Town in February 2023 seeking adventure, only to vanish without a trace while hiking in Hout Bay. What began as a missing persons report quickly spiraled into one of South Africa's most unsettling unsolved mysteries, a disappearance wrapped in robbery, ganglangs, and the chilling possibility of foul play. Over the course of this episode, we'll reconstruct Nick's final known movements, the evidence uncovered by investigators, and the haunting gaps that still remain. But before we walk down the Karbonkelberg trail where Nick was last seen, let's begin with who he was, and how a young man from Germany ended up in the shadow of Table Mountain. Before we begin, a quick reminder, if you're interested in broader coverage of crime from solved cases to ongoing investigations, make sure you check out our sister podcast, Crime Central South Africa. While Unsolved Murders SA focuses strictly on unresolved cases, Crime Central explores a wider lens of South African crime stories, giving you context and commentary on everything from high-profile trials to grassroots community struggles with violence. Both shows are part of our commitment to examining crime in South Africa, its causes, its consequences, and the stories of the people caught in between. To understand the weight of this case, we need to know who Nick Frischke was. Nick wasn't just another name in the headlines. He was a young man with a story, a dream, and a family who still, to this day, waits for answers. Born and raised in Germany, Nick was known to his friends and family as energetic, adventurous, and compassionate. He had a passion for running and fitness, and he even volunteered as a firefighter, the kind of selflessness that made him dependable in a crisis and admired among his peers. His life was in transition. Having saved up enough money, Nick decided to take one last big trip before starting university. That trip brought him thousands of kilometers from home, all the way to Cape Town, South Africa. Cape Town is one of the world's most desirable travel destinations, famous for its breathtaking views, vineyards, and mountains. But it's also a city with sharp contrasts, a place where natural beauty often masks underlying social struggles, crime, and inequality. For Nick, the city must have looked like a playground of adventure, mountains to climb, oceans to surf, and a vibrant culture to experience. According to his family, Nick arrived in Cape Town on Tuesday, 6 February 2023. He booked an Airbnb in Pinelands, a quiet middle-class suburb not far from Cape Town's central business district. For over a week, he lived like many young travelers do, independently, excited to explore, and sharing occasional updates with his loved ones back home in Germany. But on Wednesday, 15 February 2023, that communication stopped. Nick had told his family that morning that he was going hiking. That wasn't unusual. Cape Town's trails attract thousands of hikers every week, but Nick never returned from that hike. He never came back to his Airbnb. He didn't attend the surfing lessons he had booked for the following day. His belongings, his clothes, his possessions, all of it remained untouched in his rented room. It was as if he had walked into the mountains and simply disappeared. In the early days of the search, his family scrambled to piece together his last movements. CCTV footage from South African national parks revealed Nick disembarking from an Uber near the Karbonkelberg trail in Hout Bay and walking toward the mountain. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. The footage painted a clear but heartbreaking picture. He was wearing blue denim shorts, a beige t-shirt, and white sneakers. He carried a backpack, a hiker ready for adventure, and he walked alone, unaware that these might be the last steps anyone would ever see him take. Just a day earlier, on Valentine's Day, Nick had been spotted at the bustling V&A waterfront, one of Cape Town's most popular shopping and tourist areas. He appeared relaxed, moving about like any traveler enjoying their holiday. But by the next morning, Nick was on the mountain, and after that, silence. His brother, Tom Frischke, was one of the first to sound the alarm when Nick failed to check in. In a public statement, Tom expressed the family's growing fears. Open quote, "All of his stuff is still there. Thursday he signed up for a surf course and he never showed up. We don't know what to do and think that he's in a helpless situation. The mountain guard and local police, as well as the Germans, are informed." Close quote. For Nick's parents and siblings, this was the start of an unimaginable ordeal. From afar in Germany, they launched a desperate campaign to keep Nick's name alive on social media. They begged for information, for leads, for anything that could help. Meanwhile, in Cape Town, the police opened an investigation aided by SANParks officials and volunteers who scoured the mountain trails. Nick was described in missing persons notices as slender build, brown hair, the height of 1.75 meters, prominent ears, pointed nose, thin upper lip, thick lower lip. A young man whose physical features were now reduced to identifiers on a poster distributed across Cape Town and beyond. At first, authorities and the public hoped this was a simple case of a hiker gone astray. After all, Cape Town's mountains, while beautiful, can be treacherous. Hikers sometimes lose their way, injure themselves, or underestimate the difficulty of the terrain. But as the days passed and Nick remained missing, the tone shifted from hope to dread. And that's because Nick hadn't just vanished into thin air. Soon, evidence would emerge suggesting that his disappearance wasn't just a hiking accident. It was something darker, something criminal, something that would tie his name to local gangs, stolen property, and eventually a court case that continues to this day. But we'll soon get to that. For now, as we close this first section of the story, it's important to pause and remember Nick as he was. Not just a missing hiker, not just a foreign name in the headlines, but a young man at the threshold of life who came to South Africa for adventure and never made it home. On the morning of Wednesday, 15 February 2023, Nick Frischke stepped out of his Airbnb in Pinelands for what should have been another day of adventure in Cape Town. By now, he'd been in the city for just over a week. His plan that morning was simple: go hiking. It was something he told his family about, and hiking was one of the many activities that drew him to South Africa in the first place. At around 10 a.m., Nick left his accommodation on foot. He was dressed casually for the trail. Blue denim shorts, a beige t-shirt and white sneakers, and a backpack slung over his shoulder. He had saved up for this trip. He was young and fit, and he was eager to experience the iconic landscapes Cape Town had to offer. From Pinelands, he booked an Uber. CCTV footage later confirmed his arrival near the Karbonkelberg trailhead in Hout Bay. This trail is less famous than Lion's Head or Platteklip Gorge, but is known among locals and experienced hikers for its rugged beauty. The Karbonkelberg Trail winds along cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, eventually leading to Sandy Bay and beyond. It's also challenging in parts, with rocky outcrops and secluded stretches that cut past the Hangberg community. That morning, CCTV cameras from SANParks captured Nick walking toward the mountain, backpack on, dressed like any other tourist ready for a day's adventure. This was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. Witnesses later recalled seeing him near the beach, taking photos along the boulders, a common activity for hikers enjoying the scenery. But beyond that point, Nick disappeared. When Nick's family in Germany couldn't reach him, alarm bells rang quickly. His younger brother, Tom, became the first to publicly raise the alarm. Nick was usually communicative, but by the evening of the 15th, he was unreachable. The next day, Thursday, he was meant to start surfing lessons he had already paid for. He never showed up. His belongings were still at his Airbnb. Local authorities initially treated the case as a missing hiker search. Cape Town has experienced similar cases before, hikers straying from marked trails, accidents in steep ravines, or even falls near cliff edges. Search and rescue teams know the risks. SANParks rangers, police canine units, and volunteers fanned out across Karbonkelberg, retracing possible routes Nick might have taken. Helicopters scanned from above when weather allowed. Dogs searched along the paths and dense bushes. Drones were deployed in certain areas. Divers even searched the waters near the base of the cliffs, in case Nick had slipped or attempted to reach the shore. But for all the manpower, nothing was found. Not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not a trace of Nick. 6 days later, the case took a sudden and chilling turn. On the morning of Tuesday, 21 February 2023, police conducted a raid in Hangberg, a neighborhood on the slopes of Hout Bay known for poverty and gang activity. The raid itself was initially unrelated to Nick's case. Officers were searching for stolen goods and weapons tied to another crime. Inside one of the bungalows, they uncovered a stash of illicit items: a .38 special revolver, several rounds of live ammunition, a half tablet of mandrax, burglary tools, multiple stolen cell phones. And then, among the seized evidence, investigators found something that changed everything: a Visa card in the name of Nick Frischke. The discovery immediately linked Nick's disappearance to a robbery. Whatever had happened on the trail was no longer just a case of a tourist lost in the mountains. This was foul play. 2 men aged 22 and 23 were arrested during the raid and brought in for questioning. News of the discovery quickly spread through community WhatsApp groups and eventually reached Nick's family. What began as a desperate search for a missing hiker had turned into something far darker: a violent crime. As police interrogated the suspects, more of Nick's belongings surfaced. His backpack and cell phone were recovered, as well as a knife believed to have been taken from him. These items were key evidence. They placed Nick in contact with the suspects and they confirmed he had been robbed. Soon, more arrests followed. By 27 February, 3 men appeared in court in connection with the case. Community policing forums revealed that these suspects had admitted to robbing Nick on the day he had vanished. But there was a glaring problem. The suspects denied having anything to do with his disappearance. They admitted to the theft, but not to harming him or causing him to vanish. For investigators, this was an infuriating development. The suspects acknowledged part of the truth, but withheld the most crucial piece: what happened to Nick himself. By early March, police had linked 5 suspects to the crime. Their charges included aggravated robbery, illegal possession of firearms, and gang-related crimes under the Prevention of Organized Crime Act. Some of these suspects were alleged members of the feared 28 gang, an organized criminal network operating across Cape Town's communities. Court records later revealed some chilling testimony. One affidavit alleged that during the robbery, one of the suspects stabbed Nick. The injury was severe enough that he struggled to walk. If this account was accurate, it suggested Nick might have died that day, either from his injuries or from being abandoned in the wilderness, unable to seek help. But despite these claims, Nick's body was never found, and without a body, the suspects continued to insist they did not kill him. The absence of Nick's body created enormous challenges for investigators. South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA, indicated in August 2023 that they intended to pursue murder charges even without a body. Legal experts quickly pointed out the complexity. Without forensic evidence or post-mortem, proving murder beyond a reasonable doubt is difficult. Prosecutors rely on physical evidence to establish cause of death. In this case, there was none. The suspects, meanwhile, stuck to their carefully maintained story. They robbed Nick, but they didn't murder him. Each court appearance deepened the frustration of Nick's family, who sat thousands of kilometers away in Germany, relying on updates from investigators and community forums. Load shedding in South Africa also hindered early investigations. On the day of Nick's disappearance, nearby security cameras were disabled due to power cuts. The weather also played a role. Poor conditions hampered air searches, delaying rescue efforts in the crucial first hours. The sheer geography of Karbonkelberg worked against investigators too. The trail cuts through steep cliffs, dense bush, and areas that are too treacherous to search. Even with helicopters, drones, and dogs, the land seemed to swallow Nick whole. Nick's mother, Jana, desperate for answers, hired private investigator Desmond Peens. Peens meticulously retraced Nick's steps. His departure from the guest house in Pinelands, his Valentine's Day shopping trip at the V&A waterfront, his Uber ride to Hout Bay the following morning, and his final known presence on CCTV near the Karbonkelberg trailhead. Peens uncovered witness statements that placed Nick along the beach near Hangberg, taking photographs and exploring. But after that, nothing. His trail vanished. Later, Peens identified Nick's backpack among items at the Hout Bay police station. His cell phone, a Redmi Note 8 Pro, was recovered from one of the suspects who claimed he had bought it for his daughter. The lies, contradictions, and half-truths continued to pile up. As the suspects appeared in court, the case became a test of South Africa's ability to prosecute crimes without a body. Prosecutors argued that the suspects' possession of Nick's belongings, their admission of robbery, and the affidavit alleging a stabbing created a compelling case for murder. The defense countered that robbery did not equal murder, and without a body, no one could say with certainty what happened after the robbery. For Nick's family, the court proceedings were a source of agony. They could not afford frequent travel to South Africa, so they relied on embassy officials and private investigators to represent their interests. Each adjournment, each postponement stretched out their suffering. Community organizations like Track and Trace Missing Persons Units stepped in to assist, keeping the case visible in the media. Rewards were offered for information and awareness campaigns spread across social media, but still, the central mystery remained unsolved. Nearly 3 years later, Nick's case still hangs in painful uncertainty. The 5 suspects remain charged, but their refusal to reveal the truth remains the most important question goes unanswered. What happened to Nick? The evidence tells us part of the story. He left his guest house for a hike. He encountered criminals who robbed him. His belongings were stolen and later recovered. At least one suspect admitted he was injured during the attack. But beyond that, silence. When we look at the case of Nick Frischke, several theories have emerged over time, some grounded in evidence, others in speculation born from frustration and a desperate need for answers. The most immediate and obvious theory is the one admitted to by the suspects themselves, a robbery gone wrong. They confessed to attacking Nick on the trail, taking his belongings, his cell phone, his backpack, his Visa card. One affidavit even suggested he was stabbed and left injured, possibly unable to walk. If this account is true, Nick may have succumbed to his wounds on the mountain, dying alone where his body was never found. The terrain is treacherous with ravines, cliffs, and dense vegetation. It's not impossible that a body could go undiscovered, especially in those crucial early days when weather and power cuts slowed search efforts. But this theory leaves a troubling question. Why have the suspects not admitted to more? If Nick died of his injuries in the mountains, why not say so? Why not lead police to the spot? Perhaps because doing so would expose them to murder charges rather than robbery. Admitting to theft carries lighter sentencing. Admitting to murder means decades in prison. Another theory suggests something more deliberate, that Nick was not just robbed but murdered outright. If the suspects did stab him, perhaps they killed him to prevent identification or as part of gang-related violence. In this version of events, Nick's body may have been hidden, disposed of, or destroyed. Some community whispers even suggested that the ocean itself may hold the truth that Nick's remains could have been dumped where tides and currents made recovery impossible. There's also the possibility, though slim, that Nick's death was accidental but unrelated to the suspects. In this version, he may have fallen or injured himself fatally during the hike, while the suspects later stumbled upon his belongings and took advantage by stealing them. But this theory is weakened by the timeline. The suspects admitted to robbing him and items were traced directly back to them. It seems improbable that they merely found his possessions without direct confrontation. A darker, less spoken theory is that Nick's disappearance is part of a broader gang culture of silence. Hangberg and Hout Bay are communities where organized gangs hold sway. The suspects, some with alleged ties to the 28th gang, may be too afraid to admit the full truth. If others were involved, older gang members or more senior figures, the young men might prefer facing robbery charges over risking their lives and families by exposing gang secrets. Whatever the truth, every theory circles back to the same haunting fact. Nick is still missing. From the earliest days of Nick's disappearance, the case resonated not just in Cape Town but internationally. The German embassy became involved, liaising with South African authorities and attending court hearings when Nick's family could not afford to travel. German media covered the story extensively, painting a picture of a young man who traveled to South Africa for a dream holiday only for it to turn into a nightmare. For many in Germany, the case reinforced anxieties about safety in South Africa. Tourism boards often highlight the country's beauty, but cases like Nick's underline its reputation for violent crime. German officials raised concerns about the risks faced by tourists, especially those traveling alone. South Africa's tourism image, already fragile, took another blow. In Cape Town itself, Nick's disappearance shook both locals and visitors. Hikers became more cautious. Warnings circulated about venturing onto remote trails alone. Community policing forums urged tourists to stick to busy routes or go in groups. For South Africans, the case was a reminder of how crime not only affects locals but also reverberates internationally, damaging the country's standing on the global stage. On social media, Nick's family ran tireless campaigns. His mother, Yana, became a voice of both grief and resilience. Messages posted on anniversaries of his disappearance spoke of longing, heartbreak, and the hope that someone somewhere would finally come forward with the truth. Open quote, "I miss our good conversations, your knowledge and opinions, and much more," close quote, she wrote on the 2-year anniversary. Open quote, "We don't give up hope and pray that we can see you again," close quote. Her words were not just messages to a missing son, they were pleas to the world, to anyone who might know more. By late 2023, 5 men were formally charged. Their charges included aggravated robbery, possession of firearms and ammunition, and gang-related crimes. Prosecutors also signaled their intention to add murder charges despite the absence of Nick's body. This decision was controversial but not unprecedented. South African courts, like others around the world, have tried no-body murder cases before, relying on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. But the absence of forensic evidence remains a towering obstacle. Without a body, there's no post-mortem, no cause of death, no physical proof tying Nick's fate to his attackers. The prosecution must rely heavily on circumstantial evidence, the suspect's admission of robbery, the recovery of Nick's belongings, and statements hinting at violence. The suspects, meanwhile, remain uncooperative. Their story is consistent but incomplete. Yes, they robbed him, but no, they didn't kill him. Each court appearance extends the limbo. For them, for the legal system, and most painfully for Nick's family. The unanswered questions are as heavy as the evidence itself. If Nick was stabbed, as one of the affidavits claimed, where did his body go? If he was left injured, why has no trace ever been found despite massive searches? If the suspects know more, what keeps them silent? Fear of harsher sentencing or fear of retribution within the gang hierarchy? Could Nick still be alive, held somewhere, hidden by people with no incentive to release him? Each theory has its weaknesses, but together they sketch a grim picture. A robbery that likely turned violent, ending with Nick disappearing forever on a trail where he had once gone in search of nothing more than beauty and adventure. As we close out today's episode, Nick's story stands as a chilling reminder of how quickly lives can change, how a dream holiday can turn into a family's worst nightmare. For Nick's family in Germany, each day without answers is another day of agony. For South Africans, his disappearance highlights both the fragility of safety and the resilience of communities who still search, still share his name, and still demand justice. But most of all, it leaves us with a question, one that has no satisfying answer yet. What happened to Nick Frischke? Until someone comes forward with the truth, until the suspects break their silence, until a new lead emerges, his fate remains one of South Africa's most unsettling unsolved cases. This has been the first episode of Season 2 of Unsolved Murders South Africa. For more coverage of crime stories across the country, don't forget to listen to our sister podcast, Crime Central South Africa. I'm Andile Sikecha, and this is Unsolved Murders SA. Stay safe and join us next time as we continue to unravel the mysteries that haunt South Africa.